It was only a few days later that I rode over to see Drusilla. Not that I hadn't wanted to see her before, but there had been no chance. This time, there was nobody to turn me away, and I stopped before an open doorway. She was standing there, tall and quiet. And at the moment I appeared in the door, she turned her head and saw me. "Drew," I said, "I love you." She caught her breath sharply and started to turn away. "Please," she said, "go away. You mustn't say that." When I came on into the room, she turned to face me. "Ty, you shouldn't have come here, and you shouldn't say that to me. You know that I mean it." She nodded. "Yes, I know. But you love your brother, and his wife's family hate me, and I hate them too. If you hate them, you're going about it as if you tried to please them. They think they've beaten your grandfather and beaten you because you live like a hermit. What you should do is come out. Let people see you. Go to places. You may be right. Drew, what's happening to you? What are you going to do with yourself? I came here today to pay you money, but I'm glad I came. And for another reason. Donald is gone. He was a great man, but he would want you to be happy. You're a beautiful girl, Drew. And you have friends. Your very presence around Santa Fe would worry Laura and Jonathan Pritz more than anything we could think of. Besides, I want to take you dancing. I want to marry you, Drew." Her eyes were soft. "Ty, I've always wanted to marry you. A long time ago, I would have done it had you asked me. That first time you visited us in Santa Fe. I didn't have anything. I was nobody. Just another drifter with a gun. You were you, Ty." Sometimes there were things I wanted to say so bad I'd almost choke, but I could never find the words. So we sat down and we had coffee again like we used to, and I told her about Laura and Ma, which made Drew angry. "There's trouble shaping, Drew. I can't read the sign clear enough to say where it will all happen, but Pritz is getting ready for a showdown. There's a lot could happen, but when it happens, I want you with me." We talked to sundown, and it wasn't until I got up to go that I remembered the money. She pushed it away. "No, Tyrel, you keep it for me. Invest it for me if you want to. Grandfather left me quite a bit, and I don't know what to do with it now." That made sense, and I didn't argue with her. Then she told me something that should have tipped me off as to what was coming. "I have an Uncle Ty, and he's an attorney. He's going to bring an action to clear the titles to all the land in our grant. And when they clear," she added, "I'm going to see that the United States Marshal moves any squatters off the land." Well, what could I say? Certainly it was what needed to be done and what had to be done sooner or later, but there was nothing I could think of that was apt to start more trouble than that. Jonathan Pritz had settled a lot of his crowd on land belonging to the Alvarado Grant. Then he had bought their claims from them, and now he was laying claim to more than 100,000 acres. Probably Pritz figured when the Don died, he had no worries. Anyway, he was in it up to his ears, and if the title of the Alvarado Grant proved itself, and he had no more claim than nothing, he would be broke. Not that I felt sorry for him. He hadn't worried about what happened to the Don or his granddaughter. All he thought of was what he wanted. Only, if there was anything that was figured to blow the lid off of this country, it was such a suit. "If I were you," I advised her, "I'd go to Mexico and I'd stay there until this is settled." This is my home, Drew said quietly. Drew, you don't seem to realize this is a shooting matter. They'll kill you, or they'll try. They may try, she said quietly, but I will not leave. When I left the house, I was worried about Drew. If I had not been so concerned with her situation, I might have given some thought to myself. They would think I'd put her up to it. From the day that action was announced, I would be the #1 target in the shooting gallery. When I was expecting everything to happen, nothing happened. There were a few scattered killings further north. One was a settlement man who had broken with Jonathan Pritz and the settlement company. It was out of my ballywick and the killing went unsolved, but it had an ugly look to it. Jonathan Pritz remained in Santa Fe. Laura was receiving important guests at her parties and fandangos most every night. Pritz was generally agreed to have a good deal of political power. Me, I was a skeptic, because folks associate in a social way doesn't mean they are political friends, and most everybody likes to get together. One Saturday afternoon, Oren pulled up alongside me in a buckboard. He looked up at me and grinned as I sat Sate's saddle. Looks to me like you'd sell that horse, Tyrel. He was always a mean one. I like him, I said. He's contrary as all get out, and he's got a streak of meanness in him, but I like him. How's Ma? She's doing fine. It was a hot day, and the sweat trickled down my face. The long street was busy. Feddersen was down there with the one they called Paisano, because he gave a man a feeling that he was some kin to a chaparral cock or a road runner. Folks down New Mexico way called them paisanos. Only I had a feeling about Paisano. I didn't care for him much. Mom misses you, Oren. You should drive out to see her. I know. Damn it, Tyrel. Why can't women folks get along? Ma hasn't had any trouble with anybody. She's all right, Oren. The same as she's always been. Only she still smokes a pipe. He mopped his face, looking mighty harried and miserable. Laura's not used to that, he scowled. She raises hell every time I go out to the place. Women folks, I said, sometimes need some handling. You let them keep the bit in their teeth, and they'll make you miserable, and themselves too. You pet them a little and keep a firm hand on the bridle, and you'll have no trouble. He stared down the sun-bright street, squinting his eyes a little. It sounds very easy, Tyrel, only there's so many things tied in with it. When we become a state, I want to run for the Senate. It may only be a few years from now. How do you and Pritz get along? Oren gathered the reins. He didn't need to tell me. Oren was an easygoing man, but he wasn't a man you could push around of. You couldn't take advantage of. Except maybe that woman. We don't. He looked up at me. That's between us, Tyrel. I wouldn't even tell Ma. Jonathan and I, we don't get along. And Laura, well, she can be difficult. You were quite a bronc rider, Oren. What's that mean? Why, I pushed my hat back on my head. I'd say it meant your feet aren't tied to the stirrups, Oren. I'd say there isn't a thing to keep you in the saddle but your mind to stay there. And nobody's going to give you a medal for staying in the saddle when you can't make a decent ride of it. Take Sate here. I rubbed Sate's neck, and that bronc laid back his ears. You take Sate. He's a mean horse. He's tough, and he's game. And he'll go until the sun comes up. But Oren, if I could only have one horse, I'd never have this one. I'd have Dapple, or that Montana horse. It's fun to ride a mean one when you don't have to do it every day. But if I stay with Sate long enough, he'll turn on me. And there's some women like that, too. Oren gathered the reins. It's too hot. I'll see you later, Tyrel. He drove off, and I watched him go. He was a fine, upstanding man, but when he married that Laura girl, he bought himself a packet of grief. Glancing down the street, I saw Feddersen had handed something to Paisano. It caught the sunlight in an instant, and then it disappeared into Paisano's pocket. But the glimpse was enough. Paisano had got himself a fistful of gold coins from Feddersen, which was an interesting thought. Sometimes a man knows something is about to happen. He can't put a finger on the reason, but he gets an itch inside him, and I had it now. Something was building up. I could smell trouble in the making. And oddly enough, it might have been avoided by a casual comment. The trouble was that I did not know that Torres was coming up from Socorro, and that he was returning to work for Drew. Had I known that, I would have known what Jonathan Prince's reaction was to be. If Drew had happened to mention the fact that Torres was finally well and was able to be around and was coming back, I would have gone down to meet him and come back with him. Juan Torres was riding with two other guys, men he had recruited in Sirocco to work for Drew, and they were riding together. They had just ridden through the gap about 4 miles from Mora when they were shot to doll rags. Mountain air is clear, and sound carries particularly well when it has the hills behind it. The valley was narrow all the way to town, and it was early morning with no other sound to interfere. Oren had come up from Santa Fe by stage to Las Vegas and had driven up to town from there. We had walked out of the street together, for I'd spent the night in the back of the room at the sheriff's office. We all heard the shots. There was a broken volley that sounded like 4 or 5 guns at least. And then, almost a full half minute later, a single, final shot. Nobody shoots like that if they're hunting game. For that much shooting, it has to be a battle. And I headed for Oren's buckboard on the run with him right behind me. His Winchester was there, and each of us wore a belt gun. Dust lingered in the air at the gap, and only a faint suggestion of it. The killers were gone, and nobody was going to catch up with them right away, especially in a buckboard. So I wasted no time thinking about that. Juan Torres lay on his back with 3 bullet holes in his chest and a 4th between his eyes, and there was a nasty powder burn around that. You know what that means? I asked Oren. Somebody wanted him dead. Remember that final shot? There was a rattle of hoofs on the road, and I looked around to see my brother Joe and Cap Roundtree riding bareback. The ranch was closer than the town, and they must have come as fast as they could. They knew better than to mess things up. Juan Torres had been dead when the final shot was fired, I figured, because at least 2 of the bullets in the chest would have killed him. The 2 others were also dead. I began casting for sign. Not 30 feet off the trail, I found where several men had waited for quite some time. There were cigarette stubs there, and grass was matted down. Oren had taken one look at the bodies and had walked back to the buckboard, and he stood there saying no word to anybody, just staring first at the ground and then at his hands, looking like he'd never seen them before. A Mexican man I knew had come down from the road from town, and he was sitting there on his horse, looking at those bodies. "Bandidos?" He looked at me with eyes that held no question. "No," I said. "Assassins." He nodded his head slowly. "There's going to be trouble," he said. "This one," he pointed to Torres, "was a good man. He was my friend." Yep. Leaving that man to guard the road approaching the spot just beyond the gap, I put Joe between the spot and the town. only I did this after we loaded the bodies in the buckboard. Then I sent Oren and Cap off to town with the bodies. Joe looked at me, his eyes large. Keep anybody from messing up the road, I said, until I've looked it over. First, I went back to the spot in the grass where the dry gulchers had waited. I took time to look all around very carefully before approaching the spot itself. Yet even as I looked, a part of my mind was thinking, this would mean the lid was going to blow off. Juan Torres had been a popular man. He had been killed. The others, God rest their souls, were incidental. But it was not that alone. It was what was going to happen to my own family, and what Oren already knew. Only one man had real reason to want Juan Torres dead. One of the men had smoked his cigarette right down to the nub. There was a place where he had knelt to take aim. The spot where his knee had been and where his boot toe dug in was mighty close. He was a man I calculated not over 5'4", 5'5". A short man who smoked his cigarettes to the nub. Wasn't much to go on, but it was a start. One thing I knew, this had been a cold-blooded murder of men who had no chance to defend themselves. And it had happened in my bailiwick, and I did not plan to rest until I had every man who took part of it, no matter where the trail led. It was a crime on my threshold, and it was a friend of mine who had been killed. And once before, Oren and I had prevented his murder. And another time, Torres had been shot up and left for dead. I was going to get every man-jack of them. There had been 5 of them, and they had gathered up all their shells before leaving. Or had they? Working to the tall grass there that had been crushed down by them, I found a shell and I struck gold. It was a .44 shell, and it was brand spanking new. I put that shell in my pocket with a mental note to give some time to it later. 5 men, and Torres himself, had been hit by 4 bullets. Even allowing that some of them might have gotten off more than one shot, judging by the bodies, there had been at least 9 shots fired before that final shot. Now, some men can lever and fire a rifle mighty fast, but it was unlikely you'd find more than one man, at most 2, who could work a lever and aim a shot as fast as those bullets had been in a group of 5 men. Torres must have been moving, maybe falling after that first volley, yet somebody had gotten more bullets into him. The answer to that was simple. There was more than 5. Thoughtfully, I looked at the hill crested with cedar, which arose behind the place where they'd been waiting. There would have been a lookout up there, someone to tell them when Torres was coming. For a couple hours I scouted around, and then I found where their horses, and they had 7 of them. And atop the ridge, I found where 2 men had waited, smoking. And one of them had slid right down to the horses, and a man could see he had dug in his heels into the bank to keep from sliding too fast. Cap came and lent me a hand, and after a bit, Oren came and joined us. One more thing I knew by that time. The man who had walked up to Torres's body and fired that last shot into his head had been a tall man with fairly new boots, and he had stepped in the blood. Although Oren held off and let me do it, knowing too many feet would tramp everything up, he saw enough to know here was a plain, outright murder, and a carefully planned murder at that. First off, I had to decide whether they expected to be chased or not, and how far they would run. How well did they know the country? Were they likely to go to some ranch owned by friends, or hide out in the hills? Cap had brought Kelly all saddled and ready, so when I'd seen about all I could see, I got into the saddle and I sent Joe back to our ranch. He was mighty upset, wanting to go along with a posse. But if it was possible, I wanted to keep Joe and Bob out of any shooting and away from trouble. What do you think, Tyrel? Oren watched me carefully as he spoke. It was out-and-out murder, I said, by 7 men who knew Torres would be coming to Mora. It was planned murder, with the men getting there 6 to 7 hours beforehand. 2 of them came along later. I'd guess they watched Torres from the hills to make sure he didn't turn off or stop. Oren stared at the backs of his hands, and I didn't say anything about what I suspected, nor did Cap. All right, Oren said. You go after them and bring them in, no matter how long it takes or what money you need. I hesitated. Only Cap, Oren, and me were there together. Oren, I said, you had me hired, and you can fire me. You can leave it to Bill Sexton, or you can put in someone else. Oren seldom got mad, but he was angry. And when he stared back at me, Tyrel, that's damn fool talk. You do what you were hired to do. Not one of the 3 of us could have doubted where that trail would lead, but maybe even then Oren figured it would lead to Feddersen, maybe, but not Pritz. Bill Sexton came up just then. You'll be wanting a posse, he said. I can get up a few good men. No posse. I want Cap. That's all. Are you crazy? There's 7 of them at least. Look, if I take a posse, there's apt to be one in the crowd who's trigger happy. If I can avoid it, I don't want any shooting. If I can take these men alive, I'm going to do it. You looking to lose your scalp, Sexton said doubtfully. But it's your hair. You do what you've a mind to do. You want me to come along? Oren asked. No. I wanted him the worst way, but the less involved he was, the better. Cap will do. The way I looked at it, the chances were almighty slim that the 7 would stay together very long. Some of them would split off, and that would shorten the odds. The Alvarado ranch lay quiet under the low-gray clouds when Cap and I rode up to the door. Briefly, I told Miguel about Torres. I will come with you, he said instantly. No, you stay here. I gave it to him straight. They thought by killing Torres, they would ruin any chance that Drusilla would have. Torres is killed, but you are not. You're going to take his place, Miguel. You're going to be the foreman. He was startled, but you will have to protect the ranch and Drusilla, I said. And you'll have to hire at least 12 good men. You'll have to bunch what cattle she has left and guard them. It looks to me like the killing of Juan Torres was the beginning of an attempt to put her out of business. I went out of the side, walking fast, and Drew was there to meet me, quietly as possible, and I told her about Juan Torres' death and what I had told Miguel. He's a good man, I said, a better man than he knows, and this will prove it to him, and to you. Give him authority and give him responsibility. You can trust him to use good judgment. What are you going to do? Why, what a deputy has to do. I'm going to run down the killers. And what does your brother say? He says to find them, no matter what, no matter how long, and no matter who. Tyrel, be careful. That made me grin. Why, ma'am, I said, grinning at her. I'm the most careful man you know. Getting myself killed is the last idea in my mind, and I want to come back to you. She looked at me. You know, Drew, we've waited long enough. When I've caught these men, I'm going to resign, and we're going to be married, and I'm not taking no for an answer. Her eyes laughed at me. Who said no? At the gap, I picked up the trail, and for several miles, it gave us no trouble at all. Along here, they had been riding fast, trying to put distance between themselves and pursuit. It was a green, lovely country with mountain meadows, the ridges crested with cedar that gave way to pine as we climbed into the foothills. We camped that night by a little stream where we could have a fire without giving our presence away. Chances were they would be expecting a large party, and if they saw us, would not recognize us. That was one reason I love riding Kelly. Usually I was up on Dapple or Montana horse, and Kelly was not likely to be known. Cap made the coffee and sat back in the shadows, and he poked sticks into the fire for a few minutes the way he did when he was getting ready to talk. Figured you'd want to know. Fritz has been down to see Tom Sunday. I burned my mouth on a spoonful of stew, and when I swallowed it, I looked at him and said, Fritz went to see Tom? Uh-huh. Dropped by sort of casual like, but he stayed some time. Tom tell you that? No, I have a friend down that way. What happened? Well, seems like they talked sometime, and when Fritz left, Tom came out to the horse with him, and they parted friendly. Jonathan, Fritz, and Tom. It made no kind of sense. Or did it? The more I thought I gave to it, the more worried I became. For Tom Sunday was a mighty changeable man. And drinking as he was, with his temper, anything might happen. Oren had had trouble with Fritz. Of this I was certain. And Fritz had made a friendly visit to Tom Sunday? I didn't like the feel of it. I didn't like it at all.